This episode of Ask the Masters podcast is brought to you by Universal Cement.
Hi, I'm Jamie Dykes with Universal White Cement, and you're listening to Ask the Masters podcast.
Welcome into the Ask the Masters podcast, and welcome back for part 2 of our intriguing discussion with Alan Smith Pool Plastering. Today, we're going to get more into some of the problems with pool plaster and some of the solutions that are available. Stay tuned. This is another wonderful episode. Hello, and welcome to the Ask the Masters podcast. This podcast is dedicated to discussions about the design and construction of water shapes. The hosts of the show are all certified SWD masters who represent the leading builders and designers within the water shaping industry today.
If you have like bad shot, we all know that waterproof plaster is not waterproof. So if you really have a bad shotcrete shell, how does that affect like the plaster? Does like calcium come through? Can it start,
Well, bad in what way?
Well, it's like really porous or low mix design. It's only like a lot of the pools around here, unfortunately, they're 2,500 psi dry mix, shotcrete. You strip off the plaster and you can just see how porous they are and how tan they are. And, does that water, when it gets through the plaster, does that have any effect on, some of the, staining on the plaster or anything? Or
you mean from the backside?
From the backside coming through?
That's a really good question. I have my theories on that from just natural observation over the years, plastering so many new pools and then redoing older pools. Because here's my little bit of theory on that, and I'll throw this out there, and this is totally for comment. I plastered millions of pools for DeMar Barron and on my own at the beginning, and we did every kind of creature pool you can imagine with every kind of gunite, shotcrete, hardness levels, PSI levels all over the place. And but as a foreman running those, I wasn't really around to see what issues were happening afterwards. We're just out there tearing them up every day. When we got our own business going and we started doing those, and then the remodels at the same time, I'm paying a lot of attention to what's going on a lot more. And I did find some very interesting scenarios where you would have pools in certain areas where you have certain soils conditions. And you would have a lot of certain types of minerals in soils. You had even areas where there's a lot of oil in the area, like the pumping oils and things like that, and moisture content and high water tables and all that. And I found certain pools in certain areas, when you put plaster on a brand new gunite job, that gunite job's in there maybe 30 days to maybe 6 months. And and you're going right on the surface of that gunite, and the soils behind it haven't really had a chance to, the minerals in there to percolate all the way through to the surface where the plaster's hitting. And so you're pretty good on the new pool, I think, for the most part, as far as soils conditions coming through. But on our replasters, you're doing a pool that's been in the ground 30 years, and that soil has actually, and the minerals, is permeated all the way through that gunite up to the back of the plaster that's hydrated and all that. And either is taken off or all that, and then we go over it. Now this plaster's hitting a high saturated gunite that has all kinds of soils, minerals to the backside. I've seen the weirdest things. At a certain level, like 2 feet below the tile, from there down it's discolored, but from there up it's white. Because maybe there's something, and I was equating it to saturation of minerals. And It's not a straight line, it kind of fluctuates. And maybe one side of the pool more than the other. And, I did send samples out and took some for a while, and we found high mineral contents of just everything you can think of. And so, sure, I think that had some, especially on the white products that show everything, right? Not so much pebbles and exposed aggregates, but the white plaster, which is almost like translucent. We were seeing a lot of that. So I think that's that question. But as far as the gunite itself, of course, I think the more porous and the lower PSI, you do have a lot of drying happening very quickly. And the faster it dries and the moisture's pulled out the backside, the less time you have to work with your pool finish. You can get more check cracking because of moisture losses coming out quicker. Getting it troweled out smooth. Of course, you can control a lot of that with your calcium chloride. But I've had steps completely check crack and the rest of the pool didn't. And it did fill quickly, and found out that the steps were basically all rebound. And so you have that issue, or it's spa steps and things like that. So sure, it's all important. You do have to have a good mix design I think helps.
Yeah.
Everything starts from there.
Well, yeah, going back to that, here in Orange County, I mean, there are certain cities that require a certain PSI of concrete because of the sulfate in the soil. So it kind of goes back to what you're talking about with the minerals coming, through the backside of it. So
I haven't proved that, but I think if,
well, I mean, I
if
think
it
it's
came
a good
down
way
to it,
go,
I
yeah.
think it's. I think there's a lot of potential truth to
Sure.
what I'm saying, but yeah. So I think
That's a good theory.
it sounds good.
Well, and I think even just inconsistencies, especially in gunite pools, dry mix gunite, you'll have some inconsistencies throughout a wall even. I mean, I've been around long enough and I've seen walls just weep like crazy, and the guys are pulling the trowel and they're troweling the plaster on, and 5 minutes later it's dripping down because of all the moisture coming back through, and that's going to hydrate so much differently than a different spot in the pool, and you're going to get a dark spot right there.
And a lot of things can control that. I mean, you can have a very consistent gunite job, but then where you have your plumbing trenches,
Yeah.
water travels and those like a river,
Right.
underneath that,
Yeah.
and it can come out in certain areas. You can have, high water tables on the side. You can have sprinklers from hillsides that are permeating on one side of the pool and coming through and saturating more another. And then you can have areas like you're saying with the gunite, inconsistencies in the dry mix shot, and you have some very porous areas next to others. And of course, those guns can burp out once in a while and not get
Yeah.
really consistent, and you get a lot of sand. And then, so the more you can eliminate that, obviously,
Yeah.
the better.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing a lot now, we do some overstructure stuff, and so waterproofing is getting to be really a pretty big thing. How do you do anything different when you're going over a shell that's been waterproofed? Because there's no way to really get that shell SSD. It is what it is. And are you seeing anything different? Are you treating them differently? It's more a curiosity question that I haven't.
You're going to love my answer. I avoid them.
Okay.
Okay.
Potential liability things, I like that. I mean, we're busy enough. But some pools we do like over parking structures, at
Right.
Hotel, motels, apartment complexes. We've done a few pools up in the upper stories, but we don't ever want to get into the existing waterproofing and puncture that. So we'll try to figure another way of going over everything and trying to keep that intact, or we'll go to a specification that a builder architect will write and try to do that if we have to. I don't want to make a spec on something like that personally. I'll try to avoid that because then I own it. But we don't do that much of that actually.
But even like infinity edge walls, I know a lot of guys will run the waterproofing down, inside and outside, and so you'll be, the floor will be traditional shotcrete, and then you're coming up onto the waterproofing. Is there any? Do you see any difference in performance there as you're doing them?
Performance in what way, as far as
performance of the material? Do you get more check cracking on the?
Not noticeable on
okay.
my end. Not that we can actually put a figure to. We do a lot of infinite edge walls on remodels where we're fixing them. Mm-hmm. Rarely do I come across one that doesn't need fixing.
Right.
You do get those that have been built well and all that, and then they put a poor product over it. You can have a wall built well and then they don't waterproof it, or they put the wrong kind of product over it.
Right.
And then you can have a wall that wasn't built well and they did everything right after that, and then try to get something that everything was done properly all the way through on the remodel. So we come in and kind of with a big TBD and anticipation on discovery once we get everything demoed down. And then we waterproof the crap out of them. We really do. We go down the wall on the pool side down to the cove, and then on the back side, obviously, as low as we need to get below whatever masonry or tile product we're putting over that.
Right.
And we'll go, what the spec is plus. It's cheap insurance in my book.
Right. Now, you've done so many, you're primarily remodel, you're primarily that. So why don't you speak about what are the biggest issues that you see? You generally tend to see a pool that's 15, 20 years old, and what are the consistent areas of problem that if you could yell at all the pool builders and say, hey, watch these areas because we see problems here all the time. What are some of those areas?
Okay, well, obviously, the rebound is probably the biggest one. And that's, the builder's gunite sub. A lot of times the builder, if he's not there the day they're doing it, they got to live with what they did. But that is a tremendous problem. A lot of times, so very often, steel's not placed in the center, or they don't have good coverage. That's another big one. Another really big one is improper expansion joints between the deck and the coping, and causing the coping to be shoved loose, so you have a horizontal crack in the tile line where the whole mortar bed and coping's being shoved loose. That's another really big one, and
or masonry nails that are nailing up the foam. Or
they put the foam. They put the foam in with nails, which is a bridge,
right?
Or they didn't go far enough down, and the concrete curls underneath. Things like that is what we see a lot of. Another thing is when we remove decks, I'd say maybe 1 out of 3 deck removals we just completely destroy the pool plumbing electricals. It was put 6 inches under the soil. Wasn't done down properly in the trenches, and that's considered construction defect. And the homeowner gets stuck with a gigantic change order to replumb and run new conduit because it wasn't put deep enough, and we have that in our contract. So just all those basic things. Another thing I find is a lot of hillside pools weren't engineered to be freestanding.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they were built to what the soils report said from the developer. And then there's movement, so the engineer says, well, I built to what it was supposed to be, but inevitably you have that slope and subsidence, and then if the pool would have been engineered, but then everybody's in that competitive bidding cycle, so I says, hey, we'll bid to this, but I'm going to put an extra $5,000 into structural steel and all that because I think it might move 20 years from now. Well, you just lost that bid for that $5,000. So, so those are the big dynamics I'm seeing in the remodel side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, we're back again. I'm Grant Smith, Aqualink Pools and Spas, and we're back with Jamie Dykes from Universal Cement. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit more about your pre-blended mixes?
Yeah, so Universal White Cement, as we talked about, we have our 2 interior finish lines, Finest Finish Blends and Gemstone. And within those finish lines, we have quite a bit of different pre-blended interior pool finishes. So we pretty much have everything from your marble plaster finish to quartz to commercial products, our pretty popular micro pebble products, and we even have some polished finishes and mini pebble finishes as well. So we have the full gamut of pool finishes all in a pre-blended system, which is pretty awesome.
Great. So your gemstone finish is, that we didn't get a chance to really talk about that before, but what is the gemstone finish related to other brands? Where would that fit in?
So gemstone is more equivalent to like the Pebble Tech and Wet Edges of the world. It's a smaller brand, and that's a little bit proprietary to the different finishers in different areas. So, Orange County, San Diego, you have your different finishers that are gemstone installers, where our Finest Finish Blends line is kind of for everyone and anyone that wants to install it.
Gotcha. And what are some of your, how many basic, in all your finishes, about average, how many different colors and types of different aggregate do you have?
So with our pre-blended finishes, I think we're at about 9 or 10 different types of pre-blended finishes now. We're pre-blending. So the cement, the aggregate, if there's glass, if there's abalone shell, everything comes in a bag for these guys. It's in a white base. So between the different lines, there's anywhere usually from 5 to 7 colors, except for in our commercial line. We stick with white with that.
Yeah.
But you're basically taking this one bag of product and you're able to create at least 7 different colors. So it's super easy for warehousing, super easy for mixing. It's very, very versatile, user-friendly.
So I didn't get a chance to last time we did this on the last episode, but we were talking a little bit about your founder, Randy. And you said he was an actual Pebble Tech installer or finisher?
Yeah, so back in the day, he worked out in Arizona, Prado & Sons Pool Plastering, and he was a Pebble Tech applicator out there. And many, many years he worked doing that, and in the 90s, there was this big crisis with the cement. The cement failed, and as we talked about, he found that need. He saw that need for a better cement, something that was strong and durable on the, homeowner side of things, but also on the installer side of things.
Right.
He wanted something that was good to trowel. You know, he was the one in there troweling these pools with his buddies, so he
Right.
wanted something that had good usability, workability, and also had the strength and durability factor. So that's kind of where it all began. Yeah.
Yes, so your product is made for plasters by a guy who
Yeah.
actually was down in the hole plastering.
Exactly. We call it for pool plasters by pool plasters, because that's exactly what it is.
Right, well, that's great.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, great. Well, it's great to have you here again, and hopefully everybody will start checking you guys out. I think it's a great product once again, and I just think your microfusion finish, your radiant finishes are just so beautiful. So
Thank
it's
you.
just
We appreciate that.
top notch in my book.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having
Okay,
me.
thanks.
I know one of your passions that you're really wanting to see is permits for replaster. And Can you kind of talk a little bit about what what your thought process is behind that? I think it's a great idea. I think it'll professionalize your side of it. I mean, I see that a lot where there's a lot of guys out of the back of a pickup truck. Kind of give me your thoughts and theory on that.
Well, when pools started getting built here in Southern California, late 40s and 50s, you fly over, you look down, there's how many million pools here.
Yeah.
And, building permits were designed to actually build pools properly, safely, and they held up. And there was a side to it of the safety components, right? Well, over the years, all these pools that were built, properly, new codes, new standards for safety compliance has come up, and that's really where I'm focusing it on. Is for a simple replaster, there's really nothing the building department's going to come in and give a standard for replastering a pool. They don't care how you prep it. They don't care what kind of plaster you use. There's not a spec they get to inspect on. But what they are going to do is they're going to pull that pool up to current safety standards. Because I tell a homeowner, I don't care what color plaster, what type. All I know is I have to make this pool safer when I leave than when I got here.
Yeah.
And child safety, there's no compromise on that in our book. As the pool industry, we got to rally around that one, and we are big, because when the pool's being replastered in Orange County, California, I think every city but 3 uses the replastering event. They call out for a permit so they can bring the pool environment up to safety codes. Door alarms,
Right.
side gates opening the right way, fence heights, make sure the main drain covers are the right size for the new variable speed pump you put in. There's anti-hair entrapment drain covers. That you also have the floating devices that show that everything you can do to make the pool as safe as possible for children. Now, of course, obviously, the most safe thing is to watch your kids, but invariably you have that incident where they don't get out there. The permits are made to actually ensure that happens. And unfortunately, what's happening is people are putting profit over safety. They would rather tell the homeowner, you don't need that permit, it's grandfathered in or something, because they know that if you got to pull a permit, everything gets complicated. Instead of getting through in and out of that job really quick, you have the permit process, you have potentially, getting red tagged or marked up on something, and then the customer has to pay potentially more dollars to maybe bring his backyard up to code. And so a guy will say, well, you don't have to do that, and they'll just try to get away from that just to sell the job. And that's what we run into. We try to pull permits in every single job, or most of our competitors are telling the customer, you don't have to do that. The bad part about that is if, God forbid, there's ever a death or injury to that pool and it wasn't brought up to safety standard,
Right.
you just had a contractor that told the customer not to do something that they should have, and who's responsible?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right? And I don't think our industry should even toy around with that one. I think everybody should just step up to the plate, and if it needs a permit, you get it. Now, the State Contractors Board says that if you do not pull a permit when it's required, you can have your license revoked.
Right.
You're breaking the law there. And even if there isn't an incident, because that's what we're supposed to do as licensed contractors, is let the customer know and inform them what the right thing to do is, and to bring that pool up to safety standard,
Right.
whether it's whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think we have that responsibility. And the swimming pool industry needs to lead that, not get pulled into it, but actually get in front of that line and lead that safety. The
Right.
Child Prevention Foundation, or Child Drowning Prevention Foundation is really behind this type of thing.
Yeah.
And I've been talking to them about that, and they're all behind that. And let's make these pools safe, fun. There's no reason for them to be dangerous.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I run into. Whenever I do go to remodel lead, we have a single main drain. It's like, okay, so we're going to split the main drains. We're going to do multiple suction outlets. And everybody in the homeowner's like, well, these other 5 guys we had come out said we don't need to do that. And so at that point, I'm swimming against the current. So
no pun intended.
Yeah.
And here's how bad it can get. 2 weeks ago, I was up on an inspection for the National Plasters Council on a plaster job that people didn't like, and it was up in L.A. And I went and looked at the pool, and the homeowner was there, the contractor was there, everybody was there. And I look, and there was a big issue with the product installed, an installer issue, right? It was debonding on the outside edges. But they had old ABF 64 main drains from 15 years ago, 4 brand new ones. And he had a brand new variable speed pump that goes to 3 horse. Now, I took the contractor aside and I said, hey, quietly, I go, I could care less about your pool finish, but you've got some pretty seriously dangerous drain covers in there with a high volume pump. He goes, well, that's what the store sold me.
Yeah.
Well, there's BS to that. The store hasn't sold those in 10 years.
Right.
He probably had boxes of them left over he got for free, and he's throwing those in.
Right.
Well, found out the city he's in requires permits, and he didn't pull one. That would have never flown.
Right.
And now that homeowner is sitting there. They got 4 small kids, 2 of them girls with long hair. And I'm sitting there going, now what do? We got a plastering contractor that put profit over safety, didn't care about anything, and now you have a potential issue. So I told the person that paid us, which was the material manufacturer, and in writing, here's you got these issues, you've got to let the homeowner know immediately, because the contractor's not going to, and let them figure out what to do with that. And God forbid something bad happens, but you're right, that is a passion of mine, making sure, even if you don't pull a permit, if you want to try maybe get away with that, at least bring everything up to current safety standards.
Right. Yeah.
But who's going to sign off and said you did?
Right.
But I don't want that liability.
Yeah.
And God forbid something happens, that's willful neglect. Your insurance won't cover you.
Right.
That's criminal.
Right.
And you can be in serious problems if there's ever an issue with that. So it's in California is very litigious and very, very regulatory, and that's the way it is. And if we're going to do work here, you either do it right, or you got to be an outlaw in the industry. If you're not. So
and I we had another program not too long ago where we talked about drowning prevention and that, and it's. The conversation doesn't have to be negative. We have to get past that as builders. We have to be able to, bring this topic up because, you have a dangerous item in your backyard. You're not going to leave an open fire pit without your kids out there monitoring them. It's the same thing, and it's even more dangerous because the kids want to swim in the pool. They know somewhat to stay away from the fire. We need to just get everybody within the industry really talking about it because it's good responsibility.
Right, and you have to have a certain amount of reasonableness in the conversation. For instance, how many kids get run over in the street in front of their house because they got out through the front door in a year?
Right.
Now, is the street bad? No, it can be dangerous if it's not monitored and that whole thing. There's a lot less likelihood of the events in the swimming pool than kids getting hit on their bike or out in front and all that. But you got to make it safe because it is, as you can, because it is a tremendous resource for everybody, and it can be so fun, and all this other stuff is so preventable. But you're right. I think, and by doing it the right way, the way we're talking about it, is going to really take away that negative connotation to it.
Well, the cost even just to do it right is not that big of a cost. What's a remodel permit? $150 in a lot of cities, or
$150 to $200, but then the fees for us to do plans and then sit inspections, and before you know it, you're $1,000. And then the upgrades potentially.
Right. I understand, and granted that's true. But it's we're doing this is. honestly, whether you're doing like a really simple pool or something more complex, it's still a luxury to have in your backyard. So,
it is. But your point is right, though. In
Yeah.
the scheme of the potential,
The Penton,
it's
right,
nothing.
correct. Yeah, it's nothing.
It's
right.
nothing.
Yeah.
You
What's
know,
a child's life worth?
It's
Right.
exactly right. And so, you know, I mean, I just talked to a customer today, and they said, well, I don't have any kids.
Right.
And I go, well, you have visitors, and you have side gates that they
Right.
don't open, a kid can get in, and whoever you sell it to.
Yeah.
And so they, you know, you just got to think, you
Yeah.
know, the long view on this, and that's what the city does. And they're there to protect the consumer. They
Right.
really are.
Yeah. Well, I just think as an industry, if we're going to get up to that level where we want to be with other industries, you know, just like a car manufacturer or some, you know, they have certain standards they want to meet with, like seat belts or airbags or whatever. And we've got to get up to that same level where, you know, we're definitely going to be where we're still going to be thought of as, you know, the pool guy, you know, kind of thing, instead of being, you know, more professional about it.
Well, you're right. You know, the pool industry, unfortunately, over the years hasn't developed the best reputation in the construction side,
Right.
because there's been so many shysters. You know, a lot of guys getting into the industry as purely subcontracting everything. And, you know, there hasn't been a lot of what I'd call real professionalism with some people. And then obviously others there has been. And so trying to get through that, you know, we don't want to look like we're one step below the carnival crowd in the construction
Right.
field. You know, we want
Yeah.
to be the leaders here, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be.
Right.
And but by people shirking permits when they need to be pulled just to sign the job
Yeah.
and not bring everybody up is one of those things right now that is not good for our industry.
Right.
Or specifically looking at that pool when you're replastering and looking for those safety, and
Yeah.
at least bringing it to the customer's knowledge and letting them know. And if they decide not to, it's their call,
Right.
and they sign off on it. And but I think that's something we need to really focus
Yeah.
on more and more. And I know a
Right.
lot of people don't want to, but you know, that's a discussion we could have at the association level for our
Yeah.
trade associations, and really push for that,
Right.
because that is our long-term health for our
Right.
industry, whether it's water conservation, safety, you know, energy, whatever you're going to do to sustain this industry,
Right.
labor,
Yeah.
you know, proper labor, all that things. And the one, the sustainability is the safety aspect,
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
big time.
Well, before we run out of too much time here, big topic I think everybody likes to talk about is colored plasters. So, you know, Dave, I mean, you were talking about that earlier, and you know, the complexity of colored plaster. And why don't you give us your opinion and what you like about it or don't like about it, and the best way to handle it?
All right, color plaster. Well, color plaster, first off, to understand, color plaster, you know, is basically plaster is marble sand, white cement, and pigment. You have two kinds of pigment, organic and inorganic. All right. Organic pigment is, and the blues are called phthalates, and in the browns and blacks, they're carbon-based. And then you have the inorganics, which are mineral-based. In the blues are chromiums, cobalts, and in the browns and blacks, it's iron oxide. Now, the difference between the two is really particle size more than anything. The mineral-based ones have a much larger particle base than the inorganic, much smaller. So you need very little mineral or organic to go a long ways. Like a gallon of blue organic just really goes a long ways in a mix. It makes anything super blue, right? The problem is the particle size is so small. As soon as that water gets the least bit aggressive, it starts to dissolve calcium hydroxide out, and those small aggregate, or those small particles of pigment go with it, start lightening up. That's why when spot etch happens on a color, it turns white, because it's pulling pigment out of it. Where the larger ones, it's harder to pull it. It's a big, chunkier piece, and but it's also much more expensive to hold that. And so you need a lot more of it to contaminate the mix to create enough particles in there to have a uniform look. So that's what that's made out of. Now, as far as colored plaster, the big thing everybody says on smooth troweled plasters is uniformity in surface color.
Right.
So in our particular company, we have a sign-off sheet that has 6 different pictures on the cover of the sheet of different potential issues with color plaster, from craze cracking showing white highlighting to carbonation, to spot etching, to just streaking modeling, to hydration, to all those things that happen normally in the occurrence of the pool's life, and even stuff that happens within the first week or two that we don't have control over. And we have them say, I show them all those pictures and say, to meet your expectation, customer expectation, what this can or can't do. If they say, I can live with that, then they sign off. They go, I can't live with that, and I go, let's go look at a different product, because they go, well, the other guy said, his all turned out perfect. I go, well, then I'd sign with that guy, because I can't do that. Now, every plaster I know of in the nation has a colored plaster sign off that says, we're not responsible for streaking, modeling, this, that, and the other thing, because no matter how well you trowel a pool, colored plaster, it can have issues of streaking and modeling and things like that because of moisture being drawn from the backside of it, with the gunite issues, or just normal evaporation of moistures from the surface of it. There's just so many different issues that can cause things as far as the troweling mechanisms. If you have plaster that is drying too fast in one area and not in another, it can highlight lighter or darker. If he's got to put a little water on it to work fat up because it's drying too quick, that can create a discolor issue compared to the rest of the pool. And then you have just natural carbonation of calcium coming to the surface and then kind of working their way back in. Creates almost like a fog over the surface of it, and that could be difficult. And so since we don't have that much control over it, we don't warranty that. Now, is there things you can do to help it? Yes, I think so. For instance, like we tent a lot of our pools. There's been talk about you keep the sun off it so you don't have one wall that's drying faster than another. That's super helpful. And that you have a little more consistency in how one side's drying off of another. And so you don't have areas taking off on you. And so we've been doing that for years, and that seems to help a lot. Of course, you can always do one in cooler weather. That's nice, but that's not always possible.
Right.
What do you do in Palm Springs, Phoenix, even here when it gets hot? Well, we have to wait till March to do your pool, and here it is, August.
You
just got to do with what you can get. Just realizing that colored plaster jobs are susceptible to that. And so as long as the customer understands what it can and can't do. Now, the customer might have been very fortunate in his previous 2 or 3 pools had colored plaster. They're all extremely uniform. And now you do one and everything goes perfect.
Right.
And then, voila, you got all this, it looks patinaed. Well, you did something wrong. You used too much water, you used too much calcium, you used this, you did that, blah, 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 blah. And in fact, the thing could have gone perfectly. And so we only warranty what we can control. And so we're really clear that we tell the customer what we're willing to warranty and not warranty on a colored plaster job. Once they understand on the front end, and I figure you can tell them and they can read it, but it's never the same thing as if they see it in a picture. And then once they see that, and what we've done with those, we just simply lay that form in front of them and say, here's where you signed off, it's exactly the same thing. And they go, I just didn't realize it would happen to me. Or let's go to a pebble, but we rectify them a lot of times with a customer. If they're a good customer and they're being fair with us, we'll redo the pool form and we'll charge them material and labor to do it in a pebble product. Yeah. And we're not marking it up much. Or if they come after there's guns blazing, I'm going to sue you and all that. Well, all bets are off. Go ahead and sue me. You signed this. Right. But can you help us out here? What can we do? We're a little bit more customer friendly.
Yeah. With the advent of these micro aggregates now, I think the material side of it is maturing, and you can really get now to, it's not perfectly smooth like a traditional, hard troweled plaster, but some of the micro aggregates they're not very rough. It's not the old days where you have the big square aggregate pebble finishes that are not super smooth.
I'm a big fan of those. I'm a big fan of those. One of them is microfusion, I call it. I think it's made by Universal. And it's a very, very small aggregate, and you're right, you're washing all that reactive cream layer off the surface, which is what the problem is on smooth trowel. You have that cream layer, very reactive calcium particles in there. You get that all away, and you have basically a very small aggregate, which is a much smoother feeling than standard pebble, and then it's backed up with that pigmented cement, which really shows through. and you get a lot more consistency. You can still get little blotchies, but they're nothing like a smooth plaster. But those are also susceptible to water chemistry out of whack, because you can still start pulling color more than in this big pebble where you have more of a big chunky pebble being pronounced, which is non-reactive. So there's a trade-off a little bit. You can still get more chemical reaction on a microfusion than a big pebble because it's more apparent. But as far as getting that consistency, I think that's an awesome product. Yeah. But there's a trick to installing it. I mean, a lot of guys have given up on it because it takes a lot of patience, a lot of know-how. If you don't do it right, it can be really rough. You know, you just have to know how to lay it down. And we've trained our guys, and you know, we've had to redo a few of them. You know, I'm not going to have a customer live with one I don't like.
Sure.
And then but our guys have got it down, and we've done probably 50% of our exposed aggregate finishes are these small ones now. And people just like that real clean, velvety look of finish. And we even throw a little bit of glass in there, you know, and really pizzazz it up. And you get some tremendous watercolors with them. And customer bather comfort's huge with that. So, it's a great product.
Yeah.
Great.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You know, you're always a wealth of information, and
I learned a lot today.
Exactly. I love talking to you and listening because you know, I have these questions too, and it's always so informative to have you on.
Well, thank you. You know, and if people want to know more, go on the National Plaster Council's website. We have all of our technical bulletins, which talks about cement, you know, the color loss issues and masking, you know, all the things that we're talking about and discussing, calcium nodules, in technical papers with references on them. And that's just a really good resource to go to. And then this is not new, but it's there, and a lot of people just don't realize it's all there.
Well, and the technical manual too. You know, really every builder should have that. It's not that expensive, and you know, it's just recently been updated, and it's really, I mean, there's a wealth of information in there.
Yeah, become a member. It's not expensive to be a member of the National Plaster Council. If you're a builder, we have a lot of builders there, and we have our, you know, our yearly, shows, and usually in February, conferences, and there's so many classes specifically about the things we're talking about. Cyanuric acid, materials, how they work, application processes, methods, reactions, what does this waterproofing, all these things for not just the plaster but for the builder. We're all on the same page, and it's just a really good place to be to get this type of information. So I promote, that's my shot for the NPC there. So
no problem.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks,
well, thank
guys.
you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Ask the Masters podcast, and don't forget to check out our Facebook page each week on Tuesdays for new episodes of the show. I also want to encourage you to stop by the Ask the Masters Facebook page and invite other like-minded individuals to join us there as well. Feel free to jump into the conversations and even post your own questions. We want to create a community which fosters learning and discovery for the betterment of us all. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Please be sure to subscribe and feel free to share.